The dust from the stagecoach wheels hadn't even settled when Diana Garrison saw the first body hanging from the oak tree at the edge of Oregon City, and she knew immediately that coming west had been a terrible mistake. She pressed her gloved hand against the coach window, her breath fogging the glass as the driver urged the horses past the grim sight without slowing. The corpse swayed gently in the September breeze of 1873, a warning or a promise depending on who you were in this unforgiving territory. Diana's stomach turned, but she forced herself to keep looking to understand what kind of place she had traveled 2,000 miles to reach. First time out west, miss? The woman sitting across from her, weathered and gray-haired, spoke without much sympathy in her voice. Yes. Diana's voice came out smaller than she intended. She was 22 years old, raised in Philadelphia drawing rooms, and educated at a finishing school in Boston. Nothing in her carefully cultivated life had prepared her for the reality of frontier justice. You will see worse before you see better, the woman said matter-of-factly. Oregon City might have a proper name, but it is still wild country. Men take what they want and answer to no law but their own. Diana wanted to argue, to defend her decision to accept the teaching position at the newly established schoolhouse, but the words died in her throat. Her father had been furious when she announced her intention to leave. Her mother had wept. Her older sister had called her foolish and naive. Perhaps they had all been right. The stagecoach rumbled down the main street, and Diana catalogued what would be her new home. False fronted buildings lined both sides of the rutted road. A saloon with painted windows. A general store with barrels stacked outside. A hotel that looked like a strong wind might knock it over. Men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats stood in clusters, watching the stagecoach pass with calculating eyes. Not one of them smiled or tipped his hat. This was nothing like the stories she had read about Western adventure and opportunity. The coach stopped in front of the hotel, and the driver climbed down to help the passengers disembark. Diana accepted his hand and stepped into the Oregon dust, her dark blue traveling dress already wilting from the journey. She had packed 3 trunks full of books and proper clothes, certain that civilization could be maintained anywhere with enough determination. Looking around at the raw settlement, she felt that certainty crumbling. Miss Garrison? A thin man in a black suit approached, removing his hat. I am Reverend Walsh. I have been coordinating with the school board regarding your arrival. Reverend? Diana nodded, trying to summon the composure her mother had drilled into her. Thank you for meeting me. I wish I could say you have arrived at an opportune time. His expression was grave. We have had some trouble recently. There was an incident at the lumber mill last month. Several men died, and tensions have been running high ever since. The hanging? Diana could not keep the tremor from her voice. 1 of 3 this week. The Reverend's mouth formed a tight line. The man was accused of theft. Whether he was actually guilty, we may never know. Justice moves quickly here, and not always in the right direction. Diana felt lightheaded. 3 hangings in 1 week. What had she come to? Your lodgings are ready at Mrs. Porter's boarding house, Reverend Walsh continued. It is the most respectable establishment in town. The schoolhouse is still being completed, so classes will not begin for another 2 weeks. That should give you time to settle in and become acquainted with the community. The word community felt generous for what Diana saw around her. This was barely a town, just a collection of desperate people trying to carve out survival in an indifferent wilderness. Mrs. Porter's boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure that seemed sturdier than its neighbors. The proprietress was a stout woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper manner of speaking. I run a clean establishment, she told Diana after the Reverend had made introductions and departed. No drinking, no smoking, no men above the ground floor. Supper is at 6, breakfast at 6. You miss a meal, you go hungry. Understood? Yes, madam. Your room is at the end of the hall upstairs. Second door on the right. Do not leave your window open at night. We have had problems with men thinking they can climb up and help themselves to whatever they please. Diana's hands tightened on her reticule. Has that happened here? Not in my house, and it will stay that way as long as I have my shotgun. Mrs. Porter's expression softened slightly. You look terrified, girl. I do not blame you. This is no place for someone like you. Why did you come? I wanted to make a difference, Diana said quietly. I wanted to teach children who otherwise would have no opportunity for education. Noble, Mrs. Porter said, though her tone suggested she thought it foolish. We will see how long that idealism lasts. This territory has a way of grinding down even the strongest spirits. Come on, I will show you to your room. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the street. Diana's trunks had already been delivered and sat at the foot of the bed. She stood at the window after Mrs. Porter left, watching the town below. Men on horseback rode past. A wagon loaded with lumber creaked by. Somewhere someone was shouting, angry and loud, but no one seemed to pay attention. That first night, Diana lay awake listening to the sounds of Oregon City. Gunshots in the distance, breaking glass, laughter that sounded cruel rather than joyful. She thought about her bedroom in Philadelphia, with its wallpapered walls and familiar creaking floors. She thought about her mother's garden and the way morning light came through the lace curtains. She had thrown all of that away for some romantic notion of frontier adventure, and now she was trapped in a place where men hung from trees and justice was just another word for murder. The next morning, Diana forced herself to eat breakfast with the other boarders. There were two miners, a clerk from the general store, and a widow who worked as a seamstress. They all spoke little, eating quickly before heading out to their respective labors. Diana asked Mrs. Porter about the schoolhouse. It is at the north end of town, past the livery stable, the landlady told her. The building is nearly finished, but they have been having trouble keeping workers. Men keep leaving to work the lumber mill where the pay is better. You might walk over and see the progress for yourself. Diana did just that after breakfast, grateful for something to do besides sit in her small room and contemplate her mistake. The September morning was cool, the air carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. She walked carefully along the wooden boardwalk, avoiding gaps and loose boards. Men stared as she passed, their gazes ranging from curious to predatory. She kept her eyes forward and her pace brisk. The schoolhouse was indeed nearly complete, a simple rectangular building with large windows and a fresh coat of white paint. The door stood open, and Diana could hear hammering from inside. She climbed the steps and peered in. A man was working on building desks, his back to her. He was tall and lean, wearing canvas pants and a shirt that had seen better days. His brown hat hung on a nail on the wall, and his sandy blonde hair was dampened with sweat despite the cool morning. "Excuse me?" Diana called. The man turned, and she found herself looking at a sun-weathered face with startlingly blue eyes. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw and a cautious expression. "Help you?" His voice was deep and careful, each word measured. "I am Diana Garrison. I will be teaching here when the school opens." Thomas Ashford. He set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his pants. "I have been helping finish the interior work. Desks and shelves and such." "That is very kind of you." Diana stepped inside, looking around at the spacious room. "It is a fine building. Could be worse." Thomas picked up his hammer again. "You just arrived?" "Yesterday." He nodded slowly, then returned to his work, driving nails with precise economical movements. Diana watched him for a moment, uncertain whether she should leave or stay. There was something calming about the steady rhythm of his work, the focused concentration on his face. "What do you think of Oregon City?" she asked finally. Thomas paused, the hammer raised. "That is a complicated question. Is it as lawless as it seems?" "More so." He drove another nail home. "Why would a woman like you come to a place like this?" "What kind of woman do you think I am?" The question came out more defensive than Diana intended. Thomas looked at her directly, his blue eyes steady. Educated, from back east, used to comfort and civilization, the kind of woman who has no idea what she is walking into. You do not know anything about me. I know enough. He gestured toward the window with his hammer. See that building across the way? That is the assay office. Last month, 3 men shot each other dead in there over a claim dispute. The blood is still staining the floorboards. 2 buildings down is where a woman was dragged out into the street and beaten by her husband while a dozen people watched and did nothing. This is not Philadelphia or Boston or wherever you came from. This is survival country, and if you do not have the stomach for it, you should leave before you get hurt. Diana felt heat rise in her cheeks, part anger and part shame. I signed a contract to teach here for 1 year. I do not break my commitments. Then you better develop a thick skin, Miss Garrison, because what you saw yesterday was just the beginning. She wanted to argue, to defend herself and her decision, but she had no ammunition. He was right, and they both knew it. Instead, she turned and walked out of the schoolhouse. Her eyes stinging with tears she refused to shed. The days that followed confirmed everything Thomas Ashford had tried to warn her about. Diana explored Oregon City and found a settlement barely clinging to the pretense of civilization. The saloon operated around the clock, spilling drunken men into the street at all hours. Fights broke out constantly, resolved with fists and knives and occasionally guns. The law seemed to be whatever the strongest men decided it would be on any given day. She visited the general store and met the owner, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, who kept a rifle within arm's reach at all times. She attended a church service at Reverend Walsh's small chapel and counted only 11 people in attendance. She met the mayor, a blunt-speaking former fur trader named Carlson, who told her plainly that the school was an experiment and he gave it 6 months before it failed. Everywhere she went, Diana saw things that shocked her carefully cultivated sensibilities. Women with bruised faces walking with their eyes downcast. Children in ragged clothes digging through garbage for scraps. Men who looked at her like she was property to be claimed. This was not the noble frontier she had imagined. This was humanity stripped of its veneer, raw and ugly and frightening. The schoolhouse became her refuge. She walked there every morning and spent hours cleaning and organizing, preparing lesson plans for students she had not yet met. Thomas Ashford was usually there, working on the desks or installing shelves. They spoke little, but his presence was somehow comforting. He worked with a steady competence that suggested a man who knew his own capabilities and did not need to prove anything to anyone. One afternoon, a week after her arrival, Diana was arranging books on the newly installed shelves when Thomas spoke behind her. "You are still here." She turned. He was leaning against the door frame, his hat in his hands. "Where else would I be?" "Halfway back to wherever you came from." There was no mockery in his voice, just observation. Most people who come here do not last long. They arrive full of plans and hope, and the reality breaks them. I have seen it happen dozens of times. Diana set down the book she was holding. "I am not most people. Maybe not." Thomas stepped into the room, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "But you are scared. I can see it in how you hold yourself, how you keep looking over your shoulder." "Of course I am scared," Diana said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I saw a man hanging from a tree my first day here. I have watched 2 men beat each other bloody outside the saloon. I have heard women screaming in the night and no one doing anything about it. This place is a nightmare." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "It is. But it is also home to people trying to make lives for themselves. The violence and the ugliness, that is real. But so are the families working hard to build something better. So are the children who need a teacher. So are the people who want this settlement to become a real town with real laws and real opportunities." "Where are those people?" Diana heard the bitterness in her own voice. Because all I see are men taking what they want and everyone else too afraid to stop them. They are here. Thomas moved to the window, looking out at the street. They are just quieter than the troublemakers, and they are waiting to see if this school will actually happen, because if it does, it means something. It means Oregon City might become the kind of place where children have futures instead of just survival. Diana joined him at the window. From here, she could see most of the main street. As if to prove her point, two men were currently shoving each other outside the saloon, friends pulling them apart before fists could fly. I do not know if I am strong enough for this, she admitted quietly. Strength is not about never being afraid, Thomas said. It is about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. You came here because you wanted to make a difference. That took courage. Staying here will take more. Why are you here? Diana asked, looking at him. You do not strike me as a man who makes foolish decisions. A shadow crossed his face. I had my reasons. Most of them involved running from the past. Did it work? Running away? No. He turned from the window. The past always catches up eventually. But at least out here I can be useful while I wait for it. I can build desks for children who need them. I can help raise a schoolhouse that might actually matter. That counts for something. Diana found herself wanting to know more about him, about the past he was running from and the shadows she saw in his eyes. But she sensed that Thomas Ashford was not a man who shared his secrets easily. Thank you for your work on the school, she said instead. The desks are beautifully made. They will hold up to hard use, which is what matters out here. He picked up his hammer. I should get back to it. We have a lot to finish before the opening. Diana returned to her book organizing, but she was acutely aware of Thomas's presence as he worked. There was something solid about him, something dependable in a place where nothing else felt certain. When he left that evening, tipping his hat to her as he walked out, she felt the absence of his steady presence like a physical thing. The schoolhouse opened on a cool Monday morning in late September. Diana arrived early, her stomach twisted with nerves. She had 15 students enrolled, children ranging from 6 to 14 years old. She wore her best dress, dark green with a proper collar, and had pinned her chestnut hair up in a severe bun that made her look older than her 22 years. The children arrived in small groups, shepherded by parents who looked at Diana with a mixture of hope and skepticism. She greeted each family, learning names and making mental notes. There were the Morrison twins, freckled boys of 8. Sarah Chen, daughter of the Chinese family who ran the laundry. Jakob Schmidt, whose parents spoke with heavy German accents. Maria Gonzalez, quiet and serious at 12 years old. Thomas Ashford stood at the back of the room during those first introductions, having apparently appointed himself some kind of unofficial guardian. When all the children were seated at their new desks, he caught Diana's eye and gave a small nod before slipping out. The first day of teaching went better than Diana had dared hope. The children were hungry for knowledge, most of them having never set foot in a school before. They listened with wide eyes as she read to them. They struggled through their letters with fierce determination. When the day ended and they filed out chattering and excited, Diana felt something warm bloom in her chest. Pride, perhaps, or purpose. She was erasing the chalkboard when she heard boots on the steps outside. Thomas appeared in the doorway. How did it go? Wonderfully, Diana said, and she could hear the surprise in her own voice. They are remarkable children. They are survivors. Thomas leaned against the door frame in that way he had. Like everyone else here. You did well, Miss Garrison. I could see it in how they looked at you when they left. You gave them something to be excited about. Diana set down the eraser, her throat tight with emotion. Thank you. I needed to hear that. You need an escort back to your boarding house? She almost refused out of pride, but common sense prevailed. The sun was setting, and Oregon City became even more dangerous after dark. Yes, thank you. They walked in comfortable silence, Thomas shortening his stride to match hers. Diana found herself noticing small things about him. The way he kept himself between her and the street, as if his body could shield her from the rougher elements, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert to potential threats. The careful respect he showed in not walking too close or presuming too much. This became their routine. Diana would teach during the day, and Thomas would appear as evening fell to walk her home. Sometimes they talked about the children or the progress on various building projects around town. Sometimes they walked in silence. Diana found herself looking forward to those walks more than she wanted to admit. October arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints that winter would come early to Oregon. The school continued to go well, though Diana still struggled with the violence that seemed woven into the fabric of daily life in Oregon City. She witnessed a shooting outside the saloon, a claim jumper who took a bullet to the shoulder and bled out in the street before anyone could fetch the doctor. She saw a woman beaten unconscious by her drunken husband while Diana stood frozen, wanting to intervene, but terrified of what might happen if she did. That night she cried in her small room, overwhelmed by the helplessness and horror of it all. The next morning her eyes were red, and Thomas noticed immediately. "What happened?" he asked as he walked her home after school. Diana shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Miss Garrison." He stopped walking, forcing her to stop as well. "Diana, what happened?" The use of her first name broke something loose inside her. "I saw a woman being beaten yesterday. Her husband was drunk and angry, and he hit her again and again, and I just stood there. I did nothing. I wanted to help, but I was too frightened, and now I cannot stop thinking about her and wondering if she is even still alive." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Martha Hewitt, she is alive. Doc Mitchell stitched her up. Her husband is sleeping it off in what passes for our jail. And when he sobers up, he will be released, and he will go right back home, and it will happen again. Nothing changes. Nothing gets better." "Not overnight," Thomas agreed. "Change comes slow out here, if it comes at all. But it does come. Every child in that schoolhouse represents change. Every family trying to build something decent represents change. You represent change, Diana? Your presence here matters, even when it does not feel like it. How do you stand it?" Diana looked at him, searching his face. "The violence and the injustice? How do you live with it day after day?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have seen worse. Before I came here, I was in places that made Oregon City look peaceful. I learned that you cannot save everyone. You cannot fix everything. But you can do the next right thing in front of you. You can be decent when others are cruel. You can build instead of destroy. That is all any of us can do." "What did you see?" Diana asked softly. "What places?" His expression closed off. "Nothing I want to talk about. Come on, it is getting dark." They resumed walking, but Diana's mind churned with questions. Thomas Ashford was a mystery, a man with ghosts in his eyes and skills that suggested a violent past. Yet he was also gentle with the children, patient with his work, and unfailingly respectful toward her. She wanted to understand the contradiction, to know what had shaped him into the man he was. November brought the first snow and new troubles to Oregon City. A conflict erupted between the lumber mill owners and the workers over wages and conditions. Tensions escalated daily, with accusations of sabotage and theft flying back and forth. The town split into factions, and violence became even more common. Diana tried to keep the school separate from the troubles, but it was impossible. Some children stopped coming because their fathers were involved in the labor dispute and did not want them associating with children from the other side. She lost 3 students in 1 week, and her heart broke a little more with each absence. The worst came on a bitter cold morning in mid-November. Diana arrived at the schoolhouse to find the windows smashed and the interior ransacked. Desks were overturned. Books were torn and scattered. Someone had painted ugly words across the chalkboard, slurs aimed at the immigrant families whose children attended the school. Diana stood in the doorway, too shocked to move. All her work, all her hope, destroyed in a single night of senseless violence. No! Thomas's voice came from behind her. She had not heard him approach. God, no! He pushed past her into the schoolhouse, surveying the damage with an expression of cold fury Diana had never seen on his face. He turned slowly, taking it all in, and when he looked at her, she saw something dangerous burning in his blue eyes. Who did this? She whispered. Does not matter. What matters is fixing it. Thomas started writing desks, his movements sharp and controlled. Go back to your boarding house. I will handle this. This is my school, my responsibility. Diana. He stopped working and faced her fully. If you stay here looking at this, it will break you. I can see it in your face. Let me fix what can be fixed. Please. She wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. The destruction felt personal, aimed directly at everything she had tried to build. If she stayed, she would fall apart, and she could not afford that weakness. Not here. Not now. Diana walked back through the cold morning streets, her vision blurred with tears. When she reached her room, she collapsed on the bed and let the sobs come. Everything she had endured over the past 2 months crashed down on her. The hangings, the violence, the casual cruelty, and now this deliberate attack on something innocent and good. It was too much. She could not do this anymore. She did not go back to the schoolhouse that day or the next. She sent word to the families that school was temporarily suspended. She stayed in her room and tried to decide whether to honor her contract or flee back to Philadelphia and admit defeat. On the 3rd day, there was a knock on her door. Diana opened it to find Thomas standing in the hallway, his hat in his hands. The schoolhouse is ready, he said. The children are asking for you. Diana shook her head. I cannot go back. I cannot keep pretending this is going to work. May I come in? It was highly improper, but Diana did not care anymore. She stepped aside, and Thomas entered her small room, looking uncomfortable but determined. I understand why you want to quit, he said. Believe me, I do. But if you leave now, the people who destroyed that schoolhouse win. They wanted to drive you away, to prove that anything good or decent cannot survive here. Are you going to let them be right? It is not about winning or losing, Thomas. It is about whether I can keep functioning in a place that feels designed to crush hope. Then stop trying to find hope in the big picture. Thomas turned his hat in his hands, choosing his words carefully. Find it in the small moments. In Jacob Schmidt, finally reading a full sentence without stumbling. In Sarah Chin's smile, when you praised her arithmetic. In the Morrison twins arguing about who knows more state capitals. That is where the hope is where the... Diana, in those children and what you are giving them. And when someone smashes it all again, when some drunk decides to burn down the schoolhouse or hurt one of those children, what then? Then we rebuild. Thomas met her eyes. That is what you do in places like this. You build, and when it gets destroyed, you build again. Each time, a little stronger, a little more permanent. Eventually, the good starts to outnumber the bad. Eventually, the town becomes something worth defending. But it only happens if people like you refuse to give up. Diana sank down on the edge of her bed. I do not know if I have that kind of strength. You do. Thomas crouched down so they were at eye level. I have watched you over these past months. I have seen how you walk through this town with your head high even when you are terrified. I have seen how you treat every child with respect and kindness even on your worst days. I have seen you cry over things you could not fix and then show up the next morning ready to try again. You are stronger than you think, Diana Garrison. Why do you care so much? Diana asked, her voice breaking. Why does it matter to you whether I stay or go? Thomas looked away, something vulnerable crossing his face. Because you remind me of what I used to believe in, before the war and everything that came after. You look at the world and still see possibility. You see these damaged children and believe you can make a difference. I lost that somewhere along the way, and being around you makes me remember it. You make me want to be better than I am. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her, and Diana felt something shift in her chest. She realized that over the past 2 months, Thomas Ashford had become important to her in ways she had not allowed herself to acknowledge. His steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he made her feel safe in an unsafe world. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. "What are you running from?" Thomas stood, putting distance between them. "I was a soldier, Union Army. I saw things in that war that no person should have to see. I did things that I will carry for the rest of my life. When it ended, I could not go back to who I was before, so I came west, looking for some place where the past did not matter and I could just be another man trying to make his way. Oregon City is not much, but it is far enough from the war that most days I can almost forget." Diana stood as well, moving closer to him. "What things did you do?" "Nothing I will burden you with." His voice was rough. "Just know that I understand what it is like to see darkness and wonder if you can keep going. I understand what it is like to question whether you are strong enough for the world you find yourself in. And I am telling you that you are. You are strong enough, Diana. Do not let this place break you." She reached out and took his hand. In the first time she had touched him beyond a polite handshake. His fingers were calloused and warm, and he looked startled by the gesture. "Thank you," Diana said, "for fixing the schoolhouse, for believing in me, for everything." Thomas squeezed her hand gently, then released it and stepped back. "The children are waiting. Will you come?" Diana took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Yes, I will come." Walking into the repaired schoolhouse felt like a small miracle. Thomas had not just cleaned up the destruction, he had improved things. New curtains hung at the repaired windows. A proper bookshelf stood where the old one had been broken. The desks were rearranged in a better configuration. Most astonishingly, there was a new wood stove in the corner, its pipe venting through the ceiling. "Where did all this come from?" Diana asked, stunned. "People contributed." Thomas gestured around the room. "When word got out what happened, families started bringing things. Mrs. Chen sewed the curtains. Mr. Schmidt built the new bookshelf. The stove was donated by Mayor Carlson, who apparently feels guilty about saying the school would fail." People care more than you think, Diana. They just need someone to care first before they will join in. The children arrived soon after, and Diana felt her resolve strengthen as they filed in chattering and excited. They had missed her. They wanted to learn. They needed what she could give them. Thomas was right. This was where the hope lived, in these small faces and eager minds. That day marked a turning point. Diana stopped seeing Oregon City only through the lens of its violence and cruelty. She began to notice the quiet acts of decency, the way Mr. Henderson at the general store extended credit to struggling families, the way Mrs. Porter always had soup ready for anyone who came to her door hungry, the way neighbors helped neighbors repair damage from storms or accidents. The goodness was there, quieter than the badness, but just as real. She also stopped pretending she did not have feelings for Thomas Ashford. She looked forward to seeing him every day. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She memorized the timbre of his voice. She found excuses to stand close to him, to brush against his arm, to share small moments of connection. And she saw in his careful restraint that he felt something too, but was holding himself back. December brought deep snow and bitter cold. The school closed for a week, when temperatures dropped so low that the stove could not keep the building warm enough for safe learning. Diana spent those days at the boarding house, reading and sewing and trying not to think about Thomas. On Christmas Eve, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find him standing there in a heavy coat, snow dusting his shoulders. "I need to show you something." he said. Will you come with me? Diana wrapped herself in her warmest cloak and followed him out into the snowy evening. He led her through the quiet streets, past the closed shops and shuttered saloon, to the edge of town where a small church stood. Light glowed from the windows, and she could hear singing inside. Christmas Eve service, Thomas explained. I thought you might want to attend. They slipped into the back pew as Reverend Walsh led the congregation through familiar carols. There were perhaps 30 people gathered, a small group in the large space, but their voices rose together in something like hope. Diana found herself crying, overcome by the simple beauty of it after months of ugliness. Thomas noticed, and after a moment of hesitation, reached over and took her hand. They sat that way through the entire service, hands clasped, sharing something neither of them could quite name. Afterward, as they walked back through the snow, Thomas said, I need to tell you something. Diana's heart jumped. What is it? I am in love with you. The words came out flat and factual, like he was reporting the weather. I have been for weeks now, maybe longer. I know it is inappropriate. I know I have no right to feelings for someone like you. But you should know the truth. Diana stopped walking, pulling him to a halt. Someone like me? Educated, refined, from a good family. You could have any man you wanted back east. Out here you are stuck with rough men like me who have nothing to offer but hard work and a violent past. Thomas Ashford, you are the best man I have met in my entire life, Diana said fiercely. You are kind and decent and strong in all the ways that actually matter. I do not care about your past or what you saw in the war. I care about who you are now. And who you are now is someone I have fallen in love with. He stared at her, snowflakes catching in his hair. You mean that? Every word. Thomas pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and careful, like she was something precious that might break. Diana kissed him back with all the feelings she had been holding inside for months. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. What do we do now? Diana asked. Whatever we want. Thomas smiled, really smiled, and she saw years of tension ease from his face. We are in Oregon City. No rules except the ones we make ourselves. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and when Thomas kissed her goodnight at the door, Diana felt something she had not experienced since arriving in Oregon. She felt happy. The relationship that developed between Diana and Thomas over the following months was built on the same honesty that had characterized their friendship. They did not pretend the world was anything other than what it was. They acknowledged the violence and the hardship and the constant struggle, but they also created space for tenderness and joy and the simple pleasure of being together. Thomas courted her properly, as much as propriety existed on the frontier. He took her on walks when the weather allowed. He read to her from his small collection of books. He taught her to ride a horse, patiently correcting her seat and showing her how to communicate with the animal. Diana discovered that she loved riding, loved the freedom of moving fast through the landscape with the wind in her face. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Thomas told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about joining the army at 17 full of patriotic fervor, about the reality of war slowly crushing that idealism. He spoke of battles and blood, of friends who died screaming, of orders that made him sick to follow, but he followed anyway because that was what soldiers did. The worst was not the fighting, he said one spring evening as they sat on the steps of the schoolhouse. It was after, during the occupation. We were supposed to be keeping the peace, but mostly we were just punishing people for losing. I saw things done to civilians, to families that haunt me. I participated in things that I will never forgive myself for. You were following orders, Diana said softly. That is what they told us at the trials, Thomas said bitterly. Just following orders like that absolves everything, but I knew right from wrong. I just did not have the courage to refuse, so I did what I was told, and I hated myself a little more each day And when my enlistment ended, I ran as far west as I could get. You are not that person anymore. Maybe not, but I carry him with me. The things I saw, the things I did, they changed something fundamental. I lost my faith in authority, in justice, in the basic goodness of humanity. Coming here was supposed to be a fresh start, but you cannot outrun yourself. Diana took his hand. You are one of the most genuinely good people I know, Thomas. Whatever you did in the war, you have more than made up for it with how you live now. You help people. You build things that matter. You protected me when I was lost and frightened. That is who you are. You make me want to believe that. Thomas lifted her hand and kissed it. You make me want to be the man you see when you look at me. Spring brought new energy to Oregon City. The lumber mill dispute finally resolved with concessions on both sides. The mayor announced plans for a proper courthouse and jail. Several new families arrived, including a doctor and his wife who opened a legitimate medical practice. The settlement was slowly transforming into a real town. The school thrived. Diana now had 23 students, and the schoolhouse was crowded but vibrant with learning. She taught reading and writing, arithmetic and geography, history and science. More importantly, she taught her students that they mattered, that their minds and dreams were valuable, that education could open doors they did not even know existed. Thomas proposed on a warm May evening, taking Diana on a ride out to a meadow overlooking the river. He was nervous, fumbling his words in a way she had never seen from him before. I do not have much to offer, he said. I have some savings, enough to build us a house if you would want that. I can provide for you and any children we might have, but I cannot give you the life you had back east. I cannot give you ballrooms and society and all those things you grew up with. I do not want those things, Diana said, her heart so full she thought it might burst. I want a life with you. I want to teach and watch this town grow. I want to build something real and meaningful. I want whatever future we can make together. Then marry me, Thomas said. Please, make me the happiest man in the territory. Yes, Diana laughed. Yes, of course, yes. They were married in June by Reverend Walsh in the same little church where they had first held hands on Christmas Eve. The whole town turned out for the wedding, including every one of Diana's students. Mrs. Porter cried openly. Mayor Carlson made a surprisingly sentimental toast. Mr. Henderson donated enough supplies for a week-long celebration. Thomas had built them a small house on the outskirts of town, a 2-room cabin with real glass windows and a stone fireplace. It was simple but sturdy, built with the same careful competence he brought to everything. Diana loved it immediately. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, two people who had found each other in an unlikely place and against all odds. Thomas was gentle with her, patient and caring, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Diana had been nervous, but that melted away in his arms. They fit together like they had been designed for each other, two broken pieces making something whole. The months that followed were the happiest of Diana's life. She taught during the day while Thomas worked various construction jobs around the growing town. In the evenings, they cooked together, read together, talked about their hopes for the future. Diana found herself marveling at the simple joy of domestic life with someone she loved. This was so different from the marriage she had expected to make back east, some convenient arrangement with a suitable man from a good family. This was a partnership built on genuine affection and shared values. By fall, Diana realized she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening as they sat by the fire, and she watched emotions chase across his face. Joy, fear, wonder, determination. A baby, he said softly. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy? Diana asked, suddenly uncertain. Thomas pulled her into his arms. Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, amazed, grateful, all of that, but yes, incredibly happy. The pregnancy was mostly easy, though Diana tired more quickly and had to adjust her teaching schedule. The town rallied around her with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and offers of help. Mrs. Porter appointed herself grandmother-in-waiting and began knitting tiny garments with surprising skill. The children at school treated Deanna's growing belly with reverent awe, the older girls especially fascinated by the prospect of a real baby to fuss over. Thomas became even more protective, fretting over her health and insisting she not overdo things. Diana found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she appreciated the care beneath his concern. Their son was born in late April of 1875, during a soft rain that washed the world clean. Dr. Mitchell attended the birth along with Mrs. Porter and two other women from town. Thomas waited outside, pacing and anxious, until Mrs. Porter emerged to tell him he had a healthy boy. They named him Samuel James Ashford, and he was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair, and his father's blue eyes. Thomas held his son with such reverence that Diana's heart ached watching them. This man who had seen and done terrible things was so careful, so gentle, cradling new life with hands that had dealt death. "Hello, Samuel," Thomas whispered to the baby. "I am your father, and I promise to do better by you than the world did by me. I promise to teach you right from wrong and to have the courage to follow that teaching. I promise to love you and protect you and show you how to be a good man. That is my vow to you, son." Diana recovered quickly from the birth, though she took the rest of the school year off to focus on Samuel. Thomas picked up extra work to make up for her lost income, and they managed. It was not easy, but they managed. By the time Samuel was 6 months old, Diana was ready to return to teaching part-time. Mrs. Porter agreed to watch the baby during school hours, and a new routine established itself. Diana would nurse Samuel in the morning, then hand him to Mrs. Porter while she taught. At midday, she would return to the boarding house to nurse again, then go back to the school for afternoon lessons. It was exhausting but fulfilling. Oregon City continued to grow and evolve. A telegraph line was installed, connecting them to the wider world. The courthouse opened, and real law enforcement began to replace vigilante justice. The hangings stopped. The street violence decreased, though it never disappeared entirely. More families arrived, drawn by opportunities in lumber and farming. The town was becoming what Diana and Thomas had hoped it could be. Samuel grew into a bright, curious toddler with his mother's love of learning and his father's quiet strength. He attended the school unofficially, sitting in the corner with his toys while Diana taught, absorbing everything around him. By age 3, he could recognize letters. By 4, he was reading simple words. In 1878, Diana gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth Ashford. She had Diana's chestnut hair and Thomas's serious demeanor, studying the world with intense focus even as an infant. Samuel was enchanted by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and appointing himself her protector. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, seasons and growth. Diana watched her original students grow up and start families of their own. She taught their younger siblings, and eventually their children. The schoolhouse had to be expanded twice to accommodate the growing population. Thomas built the additions himself, taking pride in the solid construction that would outlast them all. There were still hard days. Winters could be brutal. Illness swept through town more than once, taking lives despite the best efforts of Dr. Mitchell. Economic downturns meant some families struggled to feed themselves, let alone worry about education. But the community that had been so fragile when Diana first arrived was now strong enough to weather these challenges together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Diana back to the meadow where he had proposed. The children were with Mrs. Porter for the evening, giving them rare time alone. "I want to tell you something," Thomas said as they sat on the grass overlooking the river. "When I came to Oregon City, I was running from my past and trying to find somewhere I could disappear. I never expected to find purpose again. I certainly never expected to find love. You gave me both, Diana. You gave me a reason to be better, to build instead of destroy, to believe in the future instead of drowning in the past." You did the same for me, Diana said, taking his hand. I came here so afraid and lost. I saw things in this place that made me question everything I believed about humanity and progress and goodness, but you helped me see past the ugliness to what was worth fighting for. You showed me that strength is not about never being afraid. It is about being afraid and doing what matters anyway. You gave me a life I never could have imagined, and it is so much better than anything I left behind. Thomas kissed her softly. I love you. I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that. I love you too. Thank you for walking me home all those evenings. Thank you for rebuilding the schoolhouse. Thank you for believing in me when I did not believe in myself. They sat together as the sun set over Oregon, watching the light turn the river to gold. Two people who had found each other in the wilderness and built something lasting against all odds. Years continued to pass. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, with the same careful competence and quiet decency. He became a carpenter, working alongside Thomas, and eventually taking over much of the business as Thomas aged. Grace was brilliant and fierce, becoming a teacher like her mother, and eventually taking over the school when Diana finally retired at age 55. In 1891, Diana and Thomas celebrated their 30th anniversary, surrounded by their children, their 5 grandchildren, and half the town. Oregon City was unrecognizable from the rough settlement Diana had first seen from the stagecoach window. It had proper streets and streetlights, a library and a hospital, churches and schools, and all the infrastructure of civilization. The schoolhouse that Thomas had built and rebuilt was now just one of 3 in the expanding town. We did this, Diana said to Thomas that evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. We helped build something real. You did this, Thomas corrected. I just supported you. You were the one who believed this place could be better. You were the one who stayed when it would have been easier to leave. You were the one who taught children that they mattered and gave them tools to build better lives. This town exists because you refused to give up on it. We did it together, Diana insisted. I could not have done any of it without you. Thomas smiled and pulled her close. Then I am grateful for every moment we have had, the good ones and the hard ones, because they all led us here. Diana rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the terrified young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 30 years ago. She thought about the darkness she had seen, the things that had almost broken her. She thought about the cowboy who had walked her home and taught her to see hope in small moments. I saw things in this place that changed me, she said softly. Things that could have destroyed my faith in humanity and goodness. But you helped my mind find peace again. You showed me that darkness is real, but light is stronger if you fight for it. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything. Thomas kissed the top of her head. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for choosing this life. Thank you for being exactly who you are. They sat together on the porch as the Oregon sky blazed with color. 2 lives intertwined, 2 souls who had found each other in the wilderness and built a love that lasted. The town they had helped create bustled around them, full of children and possibility and hope. The schoolhouse still stood, solid and true, teaching new generations the lessons Diana had brought from the East and the lessons Thomas had learned in fire and blood. It was not the life either of them had planned. It was not easy or comfortable or free from pain, but it was theirs, built together with determination and love, and it was more than either of them had dreamed possible on that day when a frightened teacher met a haunted cowboy and they began to heal each other. Samuel came by with his wife and 3 children as dusk fell. Grace arrived with her husband and their 2 daughters. The porch filled with family and laughter, with the next generation asking questions about the old days and the founding of Oregon City. Diana and Thomas told stories, editing out the worst parts for young ears, but keeping the essence true. Your grandmother was the bravest person I ever met, Thomas told his grandchildren. She came to a place that would have terrified anyone with sense, and she stayed because she knew she was needed. She built a school from nothing and taught hundreds of children to read and think and dream bigger than survival. Everything good in this town traces back to her refusing to quit. Your grandfather was the one with real courage, Diana countered. He fought in a terrible war and survived things that would have destroyed most people. But instead of letting that darkness consume him, he came here and used his skills to build. He made homes for families. He built the school where I taught. He showed everyone that strength does not have to mean violence. It can mean construction and protection and gentle hands raising children. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, trying to imagine their elderly grandparents as the young people in these stories. Diana caught Thomas's eye across the crowded porch and saw everything they had lived together reflected back at her: the fear and the hope, the struggle and the joy, the thousand small moments that added up to a life well lived. As the family finally departed into the summer night, Diana and Thomas were left alone again. The stars were emerging overhead, clear and bright in the Oregon sky. "Do you have any regrets?" Thomas asked quietly. Diana thought about it honestly. "I regret the violence I could not stop. I regret the children I lost to disease and poverty. I regret not being strong enough to intervene sometimes when I should have. But do I regret coming here? Do I regret marrying you and building this life? Not for a single moment. Even after everything you saw? Everything that frightened you?" "Especially after that," Diana said firmly. "Those dark things taught me what really matters. They stripped away all the superficial concerns I was raised with and showed me what has actual value. Love matters. Family matters. Community matters. Building something that outlasts you matters. I learned all of that here, in the last place I expected to find wisdom." Thomas pulled her to her feet and led her in a slow dance on the porch, humming a melody from their wedding. Diana followed his lead, remembering when they were young and strong and full of untested hope. They were old now, their bodies marked by time and hard living. But the essential thing between them, the love and respect and partnership, that was as strong as ever. "Thank you for dancing with me through all of it," Thomas said. "The beautiful parts and the ugly parts. Thank you for seeing past what I was to what I could become." "Thank you for walking me home all those years ago," Diana replied. "Thank you for fixing the schoolhouse and believing in my dreams. Thank you for giving me a family and a purpose and a love I never knew existed." They danced until the moon rose high, two old people moving slowly on a porch in Oregon, their bodies remembering the rhythms their minds had long since memorized. When they finally went inside to bed, they fell asleep tangled together like they had been for 3 decades, neither able to imagine sleeping any other way. Thomas passed away in the winter of 1895, quietly in his sleep at age 70. Diana woke to find him cold beside her, his face peaceful, his hands still reaching toward her even in death. She mourned him with the kind of deep grief that only comes from losing your other half, the person who made you complete. But she did not break. Thomas had taught her too well for that. She kept living, kept engaging with the community, kept attending school functions and family gatherings. She told stories about Thomas to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive through words. Diana lived another 7 years, dying in the spring of 1902 at age 76. She passed away in the house Thomas had built, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a matriarch whose influence had shaped generations. They buried her next to Thomas in the cemetery overlooking Oregon City, the town they had helped transform from a violent outpost to a thriving community. The double headstone read, "Diana Garrison Ashford, teacher and pioneer, 1826-1902. Thomas James Ashford, builder and soldier, 1825-1895. Together, they built a better world." On the day of Diana's funeral, school was dismissed, and every child in town attended the service. They sang hymns she had taught them and recited poems she had made them memorize. They told stories about Mrs. Ashford and how she had believed in them when no one else did. They cried for a woman who had given them the tools to build lives beyond what their parents could imagine. Samuel stood at his mother's grave and spoke to the assembled crowd. My mother came to Oregon in 1873, a frightened young woman who saw darkness and almost let it defeat her. But she stayed, and she fought, and she built something that outlasted the ugliness. Every person in this town who can read learned from her or from someone she taught. Every family living in a home my father built has her to thank for bringing him back to life after the war tried to kill his spirit. This town exists because two people refused to give up on it or each other. That is her legacy. That is their legacy. Grace added her own words, voice strong despite her tears. My mother taught me that strength is not about never being afraid. It is about being afraid and doing what matters anyway. She showed me that one person can make a difference if they care enough to try. She gave me a model of what a life of purpose looks like. I hope I can be half the woman she was. The funeral ended and people scattered, but the stories continued. For generations after, people in Oregon City told tales of Diana Ashford, the teacher who came from the East and stayed despite everything. They told of Thomas Ashford, the haunted veteran who found redemption through love and honest work. The stories evolved and embellished over time, but the essential truth remained. Two people met in the wilderness. She saw things that nearly broke her mind. He helped her find peace again through his steady presence and quiet faith. Together they built something that mattered, a love that sustained them, and a community that outlasted them. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The schoolhouse Thomas built still stands today, preserved as a historical landmark. Visitors come to see where Diana Garrison Ashford taught hundreds of children and helped establish education as a priority in the developing West. They read the plaques describing her life and work. They look at the carefully restored desks Thomas crafted by hand. They stand in that space and try to imagine what it must have been like in 1873, when civilization was a dream and violence was daily reality. Some visitors are moved to tears, feeling echoes of something true and important. Others hurry through, checking off another tourist destination. But every single one leaves with the knowledge that two ordinary people did extraordinary things simply by refusing to give up on each other and the future they believed was possible. That is the story of Diana and Thomas, of a teacher and a cowboy, of two souls who found each other in the wilderness and built a love that changed everything. It is a story of darkness acknowledged and light chosen. It is a story of trauma survived and peace discovered. It is a story of two broken people making each other whole. Most of all, it is a story of hope. Hope that love can bloom anywhere, even in the hardest soil. Hope that one person really can make a difference. Hope that the past does not have to define the future. Hope that choosing to stay and fight is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. Diana saw terrible things in Oregon City. She witnessed violence and cruelty and injustice that shook her faith in humanity. But Thomas helped her see past the darkness to what was worth protecting. He showed her that building something good in a bad place is how you make the world better. She taught him that the past can be forgiven and that redemption is possible through honest work and loving relationships. Together, they created a legacy that rippled forward through time, touching thousands of lives in ways large and small. The children Diana taught became parents who valued education. The homes Thomas built sheltered families for generations. The love they shared became a model others aspired to match. In the end, their story is simple. A woman came to a dangerous place and almost lost herself to fear and despair. A man helped her find peace and purpose again. They fell in love and built a life together against all odds. They raised children and served their community and grew old still holding hands. When death finally came, they left behind something beautiful and lasting, That is all any of us can hope for, to love and be loved, to make the world slightly better than we found it, to leave behind evidence that we were here and that we mattered. Diana and Thomas did exactly that. Their names are carved in stone in an Oregon cemetery, but their real memorial is the town that grew from rough beginnings into a place of opportunity and hope. Every child who learned to read in that schoolhouse, every family who found safety in a home Thomas built, every couple who looked at Diana and Thomas and believed that lasting love was possible, even in hard places. The story ends where it began, with a woman arriving in Oregon City. But this woman is Diana's great-great-granddaughter, coming to see the schoolhouse and walk the streets her ancestors helped build. She stands in front of the memorial plaque and reads about Diana's courage and Thomas's redemption. She touches the walls Thomas constructed with his own hands. She sits at one of the desks he built and tries to imagine children learning there, more than a century ago. "Thank you," she whispers to the ghosts of her ancestors. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this. Thank you for being brave enough to love in a hard place." The schoolhouse stands silent, but if buildings could speak, it would tell her that love is always worth the risk, that staying is sometimes braver than leaving, that two people really can change the world if they care enough to try. Diana saw things in that place that changed her mind about what was possible. Thomas helped her mind find peace again through his patient presence and genuine love. Together they proved that hope can survive anywhere, that love can bloom in the roughest soil, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Their story is finished now, complete and closed. But the legacy continues, rippling forward through generations, proof that choosing love over fear and hope over despair is never a mistake. And somewhere, perhaps, two spirits stand together, overlooking Oregon City, watching the town they helped build thrive and grow. They hold hands the way they did for 30 years of marriage. They smile at the evidence of their lives well lived. And they know beyond any doubt that every hardship was worth it for the love they found and the future they created together. The end.